Welcome to Bucs Insider Live, presented by Verizon. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. And you know, it's interesting this time of year in the off season. Sometimes we're like, man, we don't really have a whole lot to talk about. But after our last show, a whole bunch of things happened. Yeah. Almost right after we went live. Yeah, the timing was very interesting. So we actually do have a fair amount to talk about now in terms of since our last show. It isn't necessarily the newest of information at this point, but the Bucs did
should still be acknowledged.
Still need to talk about it now. That the Bucs did end up having several coaching changes. So we figured we'd go through that now, and then what we know in terms of the attempts to replace some of those people that are going on now. So first of all, just take us kind of through the changes that were made.
Yeah, and I think. Shameless plug here. You and Brianna and Jeff and I combined did a little mashup of our podcast, so check that out on Buccaneers.com.
Yes, it was very fun. So Salty Dogs Tampa 2 mashup. It was great.
Wherever you get your podcast. We talked about this a little bit. It's one of the hard parts, one of the unfortunate parts of the job, right? And you don't just, these are people you work with and you don't like to see them lose their jobs, but it happens. So let's acknowledge that, right? And so the Buccaneers parted ways with 6 coaches, including offensive coordinator Byron Leftwich, also Chris Boniol, Kevin Garver, Jeff Castle, Lori Locust, and Todd McNair. And also 3 others decided to retire, and that was Clyde Christensen, Rick Christoffel, and Bob Sanders.
Yeah, so almost exclusively on the offensive side, you had Lori Locust and Bob Sanders who were leaving on the defensive side, and then Chris Boniol, the kicking specialist. So now, of course, there's just so many interesting, we talked about this on Salty Dogs, the dominoes now of where you don't really know exactly. We've got a lot of free agents. You don't really know exactly what this team is going to look like from that standpoint, salary cap. And then it's, do you hire people based on the players? Do players come back based on who you hire? The order of all of that. So what do we know at this point about where the Bucs are in terms of some of that hiring and the way they're going about it?
Well, job number 1 is the offensive coordinator, because like you said, most of these positions were offensive, and so you want to get the guy at the top in first, or woman, man or woman at the top in first, and then fill those assistant positions after that. And they have started to line up some candidates, and like most teams, when they finish an interview, then the Buccaneers announce that they've done so. So the one we know for sure is Clint Kubiak of the Denver Broncos, the passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach for the Denver Broncos, and former offensive coordinator for the Vikings. He interviewed yesterday. So there'll probably be some more. These are going to be coming out. We won't really announce them until they're done, but I think that's the thing. That's job number 1.
Right, which is going to be so interesting. And so looking at this, what do you feel like are the things that they're going to be, the steps that we can be paying attention to now of how this offseason goes in terms of, like we talked about, the free agents, there's salary cap things, there's coaches to hire. How is this different maybe than, we've had a lot of continuity these last few years, both in terms of coaching and players. So we have not had to walk through this in a little while. Remind everyone kind of the timeline of when these things might be happening, how it affects this offseason, and what we might be looking for.
Well, I think the coaching hires will happen relatively quickly, because they kind of have to, right? You really need to get your plans in place. And also there are a lot of teams, there's about 9 teams, if you count the ones that fired their head coaches, that are looking for new offensive coordinators. Yeah. So if there's any person out there that you're really hot after, you may have competition for that person, and so you kind of have to move pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's been so interesting to see, because to your point, it's like it might make it harder because there are so many teams you could be in competition with, but it also shows how many teams parted ways with their offensive coordinators, which means maybe there's more available than in traditional years that have had experience in that area as compared to someone who hasn't, that's moving up into that role.
Yeah, which would be good news for people like Byron Leftwich. And as I meant to say when we were talking about that, Coach Bowles decided that these moves needed to be made for the future, for the for the betterment of the team going forward in 2023. But let's not diminish and he said so in his quote, the work and the effort and the successes they helped in the past 4 years. I mean, look at Byron Leftwich as an example. He was on the Super Bowl staff. Yep. He was a coordinator for an offense that did really well for several years. So good for them for that. But yes, in terms of a lot of candidates being out there, that's true. And so there could be some competition for him. So I think that's first. But I think probably the other big storyline, I mean, quarterback is obviously the big storyline.
Kind of a big one.
But the thing that underlies all of this is the Bucs salary cap situation. And that's something that actually is going to have to be attended to before free agency. So that's actually the next thing, because the Buccaneers, as constituted now, are about $55 million over the cap with the contracts they have for 2023, which you can't do. I mean, you can't just go, oh, well, we're over the cap.
Yeah.
You have to solve it. So there will be without a doubt, some roster moves made. Some players might even get released. That's possible, but there will be maybe contract extensions or contracts reworked, and all that's going to happen in the next month and a half.
Yeah, which is going to be interesting. And so looking at, to your point, the free agent list, it is so long, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing in terms of the contract or the salary cap situation, that you have a lot of guys that you can figure out what to do with now as compared to already being locked in with them. But it is going to be quite a task for Jason Light and his whole staff. What do you feel like are going to be some of the priorities, and how do all these different, again, dominoes affect each other of looking at who all is a free agent on this team?
Well, there's about 2 dozen of them, which actually isn't really all that uncommon. The Bucs have been in that situation for about 3 or 4 years in a row now, and part of the reason for that is they have signed a lot of one-year contracts. And a couple guys like Leonard Fournette, Shaq Barrett, Chris Godwin, they got long-term deals in the last couple of years, but before that, we're going year to year. Tom Brady almost has gone year to year. The last one was 2 years. So there have been a lot, like you signed a guy like Akeem Hicks. He was an important free agent addition for the Buccaneers, but they only signed him to a one-year deal. So you get a lot of those deals, which means every year you have a couple dozen unrestricted free agents to deal with, and you don't bring them all back.
Right.
But there are some names on there. Obviously, we keep saying it. Tom Brady is an unrestricted free agent, but there's others. Levante David, who's been this team captain for 9 straight years and really had a very nice season in his 11th year. And most of the secondary, to be honest with you.
Yeah, basically that is the way to look at it, is almost the entire
Carlton
secondary.
Davis is under contract, and Antoine Winfield's under contract, and that's about it.
That's crazy. We talked about that on our Salty Dogs podcast, of where I had looked up what a huge percentage of the passes defensed and interceptions.
I think you said 8 of the 10.
It was 8 of 10 interceptions, and then I can't remember the exact number for the passes defensed. It was something like
59 of 70 or something.
Yeah, some crazy amount. So I think that we've taken for granted the fact that we had such a young core back there for so long, which meant they were young, they were inexpensive, and they had only played under this system. There was just a lot to that was very impressive.
It was the function of a couple of good drafts in a row. A lot of second and third draft picks, and fourth even if you count Jordan Whitehead, who left last year. They just drafted a lot of defensive backs in the 2nd through 4th round range, and most of them worked out.
Yeah,
and that just became your
not
core
a given
for 4 years.
Yeah.
But those years are up now.
Yes. Which does that tell us something about where this team feels like they can get, because we know the Bucs are not going to be picking super high in any round. Does it change what they feel like they can get, or maybe the positions they feel like they can do a good job of in those mid rounds, based on the history of what this team has done?
Yeah, that's a good point.
That maybe they're not as worried about it because they've seen, hey, we've gotten offensive linemen that weren't first-round picks that panned out. Ali Marpet and Donovan Smith. Yeah, all those people. You've gotten all these DBs in later rounds. So maybe that tells them that it's okay, that as much as we'd all love for a higher draft pick early on, that's the downside of making the playoffs, is that it's less about your record and more about the fact that you made the playoffs. But maybe they feel like those mid-round picks can be a good one. And then we also had some news about Chris Godwin, which I thought was very exciting. So do you want to tell everybody about the award he has been voted to? He
was the Bucs' choice for the Ed Block Courage Award for this year. They do that. Each team does that every year, and then they have I think it's in Baltimore. They have a ceremony, and there's one chosen overall. It's generally for players who have overcome something, and obviously Chris Godwin did an amazing job of overcoming his very significant knee injury from last December, to the point that, I think Coach Bowles might have said this on your show, surprisingly he's not at least a finalist for Comeback Player of the Year.
That's what I was going to say. I love that he got the Ed Block Courage Award, but I really feel like he deserved at least a shot.
How's he not a finalist?
And I almost feel like, this is my opinion on this, I almost feel like he did too good a job of overcoming it, where people forgot.
Whatever.
They forgot, because it happened so late last season that it almost felt like it was after the season. Like his whole comeback journey, because he was back week 1, it's like it almost didn't happen in people's minds, because it all happened in that off-season period when maybe you're not paying as much attention, and you saw Chris Godwin for most of last year, and then he came out and was playing really well. He missed a little bit early in the year, but almost it's like he did so well at it that people were like, wait, comeback from what?
Yeah, he was good to start last year, he was good to start this year.
Right.
I mean, but Saquon Barkley, if Saquon Barkley's a candidate, Chris's injury was more significant than his, and his season was just as good.
That was very frustrating to me, but yeah, at least if he's not going to get the comeback player, I was happy that he got the Courage Award. And yeah, I think the awards are maybe April 1st and 2nd to announce all of those in Baltimore. So yeah, I was very happy for him. But yeah, I just thought that was so interesting that I did feel like almost it's like he did too well.
He finished 3rd in the league in catches per game,
which is crazy.
He missed 2 games and half of another and still got over 100 catches.
It's incredible.
what do you got to do?
Yeah,
I guess
at this point.
Yeah, does it really matter?
Yeah, I'm sure to Chris.
It's not like we're talking about
and,
MVP.
And of
here.
all people who is not award seeking,
Right.
it's that guy that, all of our dang humble wide receivers.
It's more weird than upsetting.
Yeah.
It's like, why would he?
Why would he not?
Geno Smith came back from what? Not starting?
Yeah. Hey, that's rough.
He had a great year.
He
He'll
did.
probably win the award.
He did have a great year. And I saw that Geno was talking about how he was upset that Pete Carroll was not one of the coach of the year ones. And he was like, wait a minute.
There's a lot of good candidates.
There are a lot of good candidates, which is going to be interesting. All right, well, that is going to do it for us on this edition of Bucs Insider Live presented by Verizon. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be coming back to you periodically throughout the offseason, so make sure you have those questions ready for us. Put them underneath our live video on the Facebook page whenever you watch our show. We'll see you next time.